40 years ago, the United States boycotted the Moscow Olympics. President Jimmy Carter ordered the boycott, which as you know led to a Soviet-led boycott of the 1984 Los Angeles Games. For the Wednesday Oklahoman, I wrote about Bart Conner, who in 1980 was a 22-year-old gymnast in his prime, and his perspective on that time and these harrowing days, when the coronavirus pandemic has caused the Tokyo Olympics to be postponed until July 2021. You can read that column here. Wednesday morning I received a story by Mike Moran, who spent almost 25 years as the chief spokesman for the U.S Olympic Committee, 1979 to 2003. Now he is the senior media consultant for the Colorado Springs Sports Corporation. You can read Moran's story here. Here are a few highlights. The official USOC vote came on April 12, 1980. The anniversary is next week. Moran says the boycott changed the course of history for American Olympic athletes and destroyed the careers of more than 200 who would never compete in future games. The USOC vote, held at the Antlers Hotel in Colorado Springs, was 1,704–697 to accede to Carter's demand. Moran says the vote almost put the USOC out of business. Vice President Walter Mondale and Treasury Secretary William Simon gave speeches before the vote, which Moran termed a foregone conclusion after what the USOC had endured since Carter announced the boycott option on January 20. Carter had proposed that the Olympics be moved, a quaint notion, considering what we now know about staging an Olympiad, unless Soviets withdrew from Afghanistan within a month. If Carter knew what we know now, that invading Afghanistan is an exercise in futility, he might not have been so bothered. Moran suggests that the Soviet invasion, while widely debated, wasn't as well reported then as it would be today. Of course, nothing is. And by the standards of 1980, the USSR-Afghanistan situation was a hot topic. I remember it well. Moran quotes Mondale's speech, calling it powerful rhetoric that sounds ironic. 4 decades later, history holds its breath, for what is at stake is no less than the future security of the civilized world. If one nation can be subjugated by Soviet aggression, is any sovereign nation truly safe from that fate? If the Soviet lunge toward the most strategic oil-rich spot on Earth fails to unite us, what will? Yes. The whole thing was about oil. And Conner told me the same thing, that he figured it out while sitting at the White House on Jan. 20, waiting to hear from the president and hearing other presentations. Moran said some feared for the USOC's future after the vote was far from unanimous. And he wrote that many were embittered. All who were part of that weekend knew, beyond doubt, they would never forget or feel any better about what they had done, Moran wrote. And they despised the fact that the White House had forced them, as the USOC, to stab American athletes in the heart. Moran says that 1980 Olympic team still is not recognized by the IOC, and he hopes the U.S. Olympic Committee might someday deliver some special recognition event in Colorado Springs. Seems a little over the top. Who cares what the IOC does? Does anyone believe the IOC has been anything but a blowhard organization for more than a century? Moran writes that Carter knew that the USOC Constitution maintains no member of the USOC may deny or threaten to deny any amateur athlete the opportunity to compete in the Olympic Games. That's why Carter decided to use national security as his motivating rationale. Moran calls the decision deplorable and said the Carter administration made calls to USOC sponsors, urging them not to make critical payments to the organization unless it supported the boycott. Moran also claims that USOC Executive Director Carl F. Don Miller was privately threatened with the loss of his U.S. Army retirement benefits and the loss of some of the Olympic Training Center property in Colorado Springs that still belonged to the Defense Department. Moran says some congressmen hinted at elimination of the USOC's charitable deductions for contributions. Moran says that years later, he wrote 466 American athletes sat out the Olympics while 81 nations competed in Moscow. 219 of them never got another chance to make a future Olympic team, their dreams dying in the embers of a fire that proved to be one of the biggest mistakes ever in using sport and athletes as political pawns. Eventually, 60 other countries joined the U.S. in boycotting, staying away from Moscow. Moran says the Olympics were marred. Protests against the Soviet presence in Afghanistan continued. Several of the participating countries refused to attend the opening ceremony, and the Olympic hymn was played at several medal ceremonies, rather than the appropriate national anthem. The Games were also hurt by rowdy behavior from spectators, cheating by officials, and security so intrusive that winners in track events were physically prevented from taking victory laps. During the 1980 Olympics, the U.S. squad gathered in Washington, funded by the USOC. On the morning of July 30, Carter stood on the steps of the U.S. Capitol and thanked the Americans for their sacrifice. After Carter departed, the athletes, one by one, mounted the steps to receive special medals commissioned and ironically paid for by the USOC, medals eventually recognized in 2007 by the Congress of the United States as Congressional Gold Medals, the highest and most distinguished civilian award of our nation. Moran says the boycott had nearly destroyed the USOC. Miller went to Washington and got a commitment of $10 million, based on a matching fundraising campaign with Congress. Moran says that money helped the USOC stave off furloughs and came only after Ronald Reagan was elected president. Moran says Los Angeles Olympics leader Peter Ueberroth and the success of those 1984 Games produced the stability that allowed the USOC to eventually thrive. Moran recounts a story from Greco-Roman wrestler Jeff Blotnick, who won gold in the 1984 Games and was on the 1980 team. Blotnick was on a plane flying from Bismarck, North Dakota, to Minneapolis, and Carter was on the plane. Once the flight took off, Carter went up the aisle to say hello to all the passengers. I say to the person next to me, I wonder how this is going to be, Blotnick related. He gets to me, I go, President Carter, I have met you before, I am an Olympian. He looks at me and says, were you on the 1980 hockey team? I say, no sir, I am a wrestler, on the summer team. He says, oh, that was a bad decision, I am sorry. Moran says that in spring 1996, when it was announced that Carter would run a leg of the official Atlanta Olympic torch near his hometown of Plains, Georgia, a group of 1980 Olympians told Carter representatives they would stage a major protest if Carter so much as touched an Olympic torch. Moran says Carter soon announced a scheduling conflict and said he would be unable to participate. Moran said Simon's speech made the vote a foregone conclusion. It is somewhat incredulous that a group of mature persons whom I consider to be among the most patriotic of Americans can seriously discuss defying the President of the United States on a national security issue. Moran remains bitter, 4 decades later. Ever the patriot despite his lofty USOC position and support for American athletes, Simon toed the line, rolling over for the White House and its hollow script, Moran wrote.